Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth Series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. It's also a great pleasure to be joined in our studio virtually by Secretary of State Jim Condos. He's here today to talk to us a little bit about voting procedures that will be in place for the upcoming August primary that will be happening on August 11th, and also for the general election that will be occurring in November. As many of you already know, mail-in voting is a much bigger deal this year than it's been in years past. A record number of people sending in the applications for a mail-in ballot and apparently planning to vote by mail as opposed to the going to the polls and filling out a ballot there at the town hall or a school gym. So Secretary Condos is here today to kind of fill in the gaps a little bit and tell us what's going on and what we need to know both next month for the August primary, the August state primary, and for the general election in November. Is there some new wrinkle that voters need to be aware of over the next couple of weeks when they're preparing to cast their ballots for the August 11th primary?
So that's an easy one to answer. The answer is simply that it'll be conducted as it has in the past. The only difference that we've done is that we sent a postcard with a prepaid return card to all active registered voters if they would like to get their ballot by mail, if they would like to have essentially have an absentee ballot sent to them. And we did that statewide. So there's about 480,000 registered voters in the state right now. 450 or 1,000 are what we consider to be active registered voters. And the other 30,000 are those that the local board of civil authority and town clerks have challenged in one way or another by sending them a letter. And they either did not respond or it was questionable what they responded with. So those folks will get a separate mailing that'll ask them to affirm that they want to be registered, continue being registered to vote, and that this is the address that I live at. So other than that, we're going to see pretty much the same thing for the August primary. And the August primary is August 11th. We obviously started sending out absentee ballots, early ballots. I'm trying to remember. I think it was June 26th, I believe the date was. It was 45 days ahead of time, as is required. And you know, we have actually, I can give you some numbers as of yesterday. So in 2016 to date, in 2016 we had 5,400 requests to date. In 2018, that was almost 3,000. Now in 2020, we have 42,000. So we easily have a considerable number increase over 2018. And a fairly healthy increase over 2016. So, and 16 is the last presidential, obviously, so that's probably more accurate to use. But the numbers are significant. I mean, you're talking literally 5,400 versus 42,000. So that's a lot. And we expect that number 42,000 to continue to go up. Now, interestingly, the August primary, typically on average is between 100 to 120,000 voters that come out, which is about 20 to 25% of the registered voters. And in years past, we've had somewhere between 25 and 30% are voting absentee. Well, we're already past that number. We've already got a significant increase. And I think, Andrew, it's if you look around the country, Wisconsin typically they had a primary about 12 weeks ago. In their primary, they typically have about 100,000 or less people that vote for an absentee ballot or request an absentee ballot. This year they had over 1 million. And I think the numbers have been proven. I don't have actual numbers. That's the one that sticks in my mind. But if you look at Georgia, Texas, any of these other states, you will find similar type situations. So there's clearly something going on. Obviously, it's called COVID, and that's what we are dealing with. So, and to put it in perspective, Andrew, what my office, myself, and my team, what we've been focused on are two goals. One is to protect every Vermonter's right to vote, and two, to protect the health and safety of not only the voter, but also the town clerks and the poll workers. Many states have said that they're having trouble getting poll workers to come out to work. And typically, I mean, I don't think you would see any difference, but typically the cohort that works the polls is usually the most vulnerable cohort for COVID. So, and that's a concern. So we are working on that. I will say clearly, all the polls will be open. We're not closing any polls like some states have done. We're going to continue to keep our polls open. Our goal is to try to drive down the number of people who are choosing the in-person option. They can still go in person, though. There's nothing that stops them.
Just so I'm clear about that point about the 42,000, that's the number of requests for mail-in ballots you've received since the start of early voting on June 26th and today. It's like about a 2-week period. That's the comparison window
Correct.
I'm talking about. Okay, I just want to be sure that.
And that's comparing the same date 2 years ago and 4 years ago.
Between July 8th and June 29th or whatever.
Right.
Okay. So then the difference with the general election, now that we've got S348 in place, is that your office will be mailing out ballots to everybody.
So what the plan? So what the plan is, Andrew, is first of all, let me be clear about what Act 92, which was back in March. At that time, the language was that it was the Secretary of State in consultation and agreement with the governor had a range of options that we could look at that were listed. Those were not inclusive. They were not the total list. It was just these are the ones that popped up to provide emergency relief of election procedures for this year and this year only. It's temporary law. It only pertains to 2020.
Okay.
The governor and I, for about 8 to 10 weeks, our teams and then he and I together, we tried to come to a reasonable solution on moving forward. He was clear to me that he did not oppose vote by mail, but that he also did not want to make the decision now. He wants to wait until August. And I had to push back and say, we can't wait till August. There's too much work that has to be done between, at that time, April and the early vote period start, which is September 18th. So we had too much logistical work that had to be done to the process, including cleaning up our checklist. And we've been working with the town clerks ever since. So since the governor would not come to an agreement with me, he wanted to wait till August. I said we couldn't. The legislature decided to remove the governor's authorization or agreement from that original Act 92, and that was S348. It was simply to remove the governor from having to be in agreement. Otherwise, the underlying bill from March was still there. And I do want to be clear that it was that we really the governor had stated publicly at a couple of his press conferences, and I'm sure you probably attended some of his press conferences, virtually. But in those press conferences, when asked, he said, "I never asked to be put in this position to make this decision. I didn't ask for it. I don't want it, and I'm perfectly fine if the legislature wants to remove me." And that's what the legislature did. So that's what S-348 did, was to remove the governor. We still will consult with him. We will still send him the directive before we issue it. We are meeting with the town clerks. We actually met with a group of them yesterday. We'll be meeting with them again. We hope to have the directive coming out sometime next week. And essentially, you're right. We're going to go to a vote by mail where we will directly mail a ballot to every active registered voter on our checklist. And that was why the postcards that we just are completing now was so important, because, you know, it allowed us to work with our registered voters to make changes as necessary. Some people moved, some people have died, some people have moved to out of state or another location, and this helps us to get that information. The ballots themselves that we will have, obviously the November election is easier. If you understand, the primary is actually 3 elections. It's a progressive Republican and a Democratic election, so it's a nominating process. But so there's 3 ballots that are mailed out. You can only fill out 1 and discard the other 2. With the November general election, there's only 1 ballot, and that's it. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to deal with. We are paying all the postage to the town clerks will not have to pick up any postage for the mailing out or receipt of any ballots. And as usual, we pay for the printing of the ballots and all the other stuff that goes along with it. In addition, Andrew, our office, in fact, the clerks have already received what we call an infection prevention kit. It consists of handy wipes, sanitized wipes, face masks, hand sanitizer, those kinds of things that they can use at their polling locations. So we shipped a box of this stuff to each poll in the state. There's 275 different polls. There will be another box of the same things going to them in time for the November election as well. We're also working with the State Emergency Operations Center to acquire some more PPE, personal protection equipment, and that we will provide to the town clerks as well to make sure that they have enough at their locations. But really, the November election will run pretty much the same as it does now, with one exception, that we're mailing the ballot to every active registered voter. Otherwise, it's up to the registered voter who fills out their ballot, puts it into their what we call certificate envelope or secrecy envelope, signs that envelope under penalty of perjury. That envelope also will have the person's name imprinted, as well as their voter ID number and a barcode, so that the clerks can code it into their system rather quickly. They will maintain strict security around the receipt of those ballots, as is usual. We will have some other operational things, but for the most part, everything's going to run the same.
Well, you answered about 7 of my questions there.
Sorry.
That's good.
I get to talking.
Okay, well, now we know that. Pick them all up. I just want to make sure one thing. That act that you were referring to that the Senate passed in March or whatever, and that S-348 was a tweak to. Did I hear you correctly saying that that's only going to apply to the 2020 election, and then when we get to 2022 or 2024, we start all over again? Okay.
Yep, it goes away after this election coming up.
Right. Huh? Why?
It's a bigger debate that we should have. What we were looking for when we first had the discussions with the House and Senate committees it was at a time when the virus was starting to spread, and we saw that we knew that we were going to probably end up in some kind of a shutdown, and we wanted to be able to react quickly if necessary to make changes. In essence, it's like an emergency operations plan.
Yeah.
We didn't see the effect of it, but when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast a few years ago, it happened like 2 days before the general election, and a lot of those states, New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, were really in a bind as to try to get around and get their elections operating as well. Vermont, for instance, on the Sunday before that election day, Vermont sent 10 or 12 state troopers to New Jersey to provide some relief for the New Jersey state troopers. And I got a call on a Sunday morning from the head of the state police saying, "Hey, my guys, I'm sending 12 guys down to New Jersey. They haven't voted yet for our election. Is there a way we can get them to vote?" So we were able to email them a ballot. They could fill it out, but then they had to overnight them back to their town clerks. So this is just really an emergency operation measure, and we put that in place. And there was some discussion as to whether we should just make this permanent. And we said, look, let us get through this year, and then let's have next year we can have that discussion as to whether we make this permanent or not. Please understand, Andrew, there are 5 states that currently have universal vote by mail.
Right.
It's Oregon, Washington, Colorado, Utah, and Hawaii. Oregon's been doing it for more than 20 years. And they're very pleased with having vote by mail. In fact, we constantly hear from folks who say, my brother lives out there, or whatever, and they love having the vote by mail. And I think this just gives us an option to, at this time, to provide that option to our voters who might be concerned about the health and safety of walking into a poll.
I'm sure you've given a lot of thought to the security of the ballots and all of that, and the idea of having these postcards coming out now and for the primary allows town clerks to kind of scrub their voter registration lists. In fact, it was interesting. My daughter, who now lives in Boston, got a postcard from the office too, and so we had her taken off the voting list. But it made me think, boy, it could have been easy for somebody to say, "Oh yeah, she still lives here," and send the postcard in and vote twice or whatever. Do you have any concerns about people fraudulently voting in the August primary, either because of that or for some other reason?
Well, voter fraud is always a concern. You don't want any of it. But there have been several studies, one by the Brennan Center, one by Loyola, that shows that voter fraud is really widespread systemic voter fraud is almost non-existent. And I think that the percentages that they came up with are 0.00004% or something. It's very, very minute. You do sign, when you sign your certificate envelope with your ballot in it, you have to fill out that ballot, that envelope, and you have to sign that under pain of penalty of perjury. And we're adding the additional step this time, where we're putting the name and the voter ID number on the ballot, not on the ballot, I take that back, on the envelope, so that we have another layer of security. Voter fraud is easier to commit than, I'm sorry, let me say that again. When you compare voter fraud versus voter suppression is much easier to do. Voter fraud is much more difficult. And I think it's and if someone going to put themselves under the pains of penalty of perjury for one vote,
Right.
that's pretty significant. And we have many state laws that already address almost everything that have been raised about the. There was a lot of discussion about adding additional voter fraud measures. Well, it's already in law. We already have it. And my office doesn't do the actual investigation. Any allegation of voter fraud actually goes to the Attorney General's office, but they have a team that will investigate and adjudicate if necessary.
The other question I had, about the November voting, was, looking or watching some of the primaries that have happened in other states so far, like Wisconsin and then more recently in Kentucky. It seemed like it took an awfully long time for them to announce results. Like in Kentucky, it was like about a week after voting ended, I think, that we found out who was going to be challenging Mitch McConnell in the Senate race, for instance. Is that going to be likely to happen again, or that kind of length of time before we'll have voting results, let's say here in Vermont? Or
we don't believe so. In some of those, keep in mind, Andrew, that you got 50 states, and every state has a different set of laws that govern how their level of participation and how that process works. So some states you can have the postmark on election day, and it might take a week and a half for that ballot to get in before it actually comes in. We're a small state. It doesn't take too long to get a ballot, whether it's from Bennington to, if you're working in Bennington but you actually live in, say, Rutland, that ballot will get there pretty quickly. Our law states that the ballots must be received by 7 p.m. on election night. The town clerk has to receive those. One of the things that we're going to do is ask the town clerks to make sure they check back to their offices. A lot of times they're completing the counts out in a school gymnasium or whatever, but we're going to ask that they have somebody go back and check to see that no ballots have been received by the 7 p.m. Again, overseas and military votes, we have to, by federal mandate, those have to go out 45 days ahead of time. And in some states, they can accept up to 2 weeks after the election. They can accept receipt of those ballots back. So here in Vermont, we have a simple 7 p.m. on election night. And we're at the present time that we're having discussions with the clerks, but I think we're going to stay right there.
And one last question before I let you go. Down here anyway, several of the town clerks I talked to are talking about, or actually implementing already, drive-in voting. Folks will drive into a parking lot and hand their ballot into a box or whatever they're going to do. And I just wondering, have you heard any feedback about that, or any sense that that's going to encourage people even more to do a mail-in version or an absentee? Or
well, it can be used two ways. So one of the ways is that first of all, you have to have, when they come in with their ballot, they have to be able to put that ballot into a secure holder, be it a ballot box or something that's secure. So they're going to be able to do that if a town clerk decides to use a drive-up. Everything else will be the same. When you pull into the parking lot, they're going to have a designated area where you pull up. They check you off the list, give you your ballot. They'll send you to a designated area of the parking lot and say, fill out your ballot over there, and then bring it back, over at this point. And at that point, they'll collect those ballots. We're also providing to the town clerks, if they choose, secure ballot boxes, drop boxes so they can put either outside on the wall, bolted to the wall, or even a stand-up one, almost like a mini mailbox that they can bolt to the ground to be able to put their ballots in if they want to come in after hours or something like that. So there's many different ways that it can be done, and we're just trying to meet the challenges that we have this year with COVID and recognizing that people are very concerned.
If you have any other questions about voting or how to go about getting a ballot, you can go to the Secretary of State's website at sos.vermont.gov/elections. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.